Trump is appalling. He's the worst president of the United States in my political lifetime. Does he believe in democracy? Dubious. Does he believe in the rule of law? Almost certainly not. He thinks the law is a way he can actually take revenge on people who've disagreed with him. I think he's a terrible man.
The UK's relationship with China are going to take a political stage politically in the coming month, not least, and year, not least because the Prime Minister plans to visit Beijing as part of his continued reset. And the government is also facing its own delayed deadline on the decision whether or not China should be allowed to build a new embassy on the site of the Royal Mint in London. Also, the UK looking for a go-ahead on a new embassy itself in Beijing. So it's also going to put sharp focus on security concerns after a suspected Chinese-affiliated group is alleged to have hacked the government in October, and human rights concerns for the British Hong Konger Jimmy Lai, who's been prosecuted and given a heavy sentence under Chinese national security law. Well, let's speak to Lord Chris Patten, who is the former governor of Hong Kong, of course, former chair of the Conservative Party, former EU commissioner, former chair of the BBC Trust, held many important jobs. Good morning to you, Chris Patten.
Hi, Adam.
Let's talk about China. I mean, it's obviously for any government, as you knew in the handover of Hong Kong, just incredibly difficult to know how to handle this very powerful power, isn't it?
Well, it's not as difficult as people make it out to be. There's advice that they give you on the underground if you see a parcel and you're not quite sure what it might be. And I think the advice goes like this: see it, say it, sort it. And I think that should be our attitude to China or the Chinese Communist Party. We know very well that the Chinese Communist Party is mendacious, that it breaks its word at every opportunity, as it has with Hong Kong, which is why Hong Kong has now been turned from being a free society into a sort of a surrogate of a police state. So we know that we can't actually trust the Chinese. The argument which is put on the other side is that you have actually to be nice to them, have to clean their shoes if you want to do business with them, which is complete nonsense. The time when we saw the biggest increase in British exports to China was just after the Dalai Lama had been invited here, and the Chinese went absolutely crazy about it. But our exports to China went up after that because the Chinese always buy what they want at the best price they can get. And if they have to terrify people into thinking that in order to do that, you have to give the Chinese the mandate of heaven and always accept what they say. It's a mad way to conduct international affairs. It is important to try to get on as well as possible with China. We can't call China a friend when it's behaved to a British citizen like Jimmy Lai in the way it has. And what they won't be content until they've locked him up for life. It's a terrible, terrible story.
So what about this embassy? And as I say in the Sunday Times today, a lot of documented evidence of increasing number of Chinese diplomats here, increasing purchases of property in the UK. I mean, the Chinese clearly want a greater stronghold in our country. Should we give it to them?
No, I think we should apply the planning rules as strictly as possible. And we should ask them why they want to have an embassy as big as this. And what they want to do is to give greater ability for what's called the United Front Work Department, which is the way in which they organize not just espionage, but influence throughout the world. They want to give it a bit bigger base here. And if I was a member of the Hong Kong exile community, and there are now 200,000 people who've left Hong Kong and come to live here under our passport scheme, I'd be pretty worried about why they want this bigger embassy. It's perfectly obvious that they want it to be easier to have surveillance over people they call dissidents who are actually exiles. And why are they here? You ask them again and again why those Hong Kongers are here, and they say it was a terrible wrench leaving Hong Kong, which was such a wonderful place. They had family and jobs there. But they repeat after that, they wanted to bring up their children and freedom. And that's what terrifies the Chinese Communist Party. Freedom and people behaving as people who believe in liberty is what really terrifies China. Jimmy Lai's crime was the crime of trying to exercise journalism, the time for exercising free speech, the conspiracy to talk to other politicians about politics, to talk to journalists about journalism. I mean, it's outrageous. And I'm very pleased that Yvette Cooper in the House of Commons the other day made an extremely good statement about Jimmy Lai. And then I imagine she was influential in getting the G7 to speak out and say he should be released immediately. The way the Chinese want it to happen, he'll die in prison with diabetes, denied Holy Communion, which is worth remembering on a Sunday every week by the Chinese Communist Party, though he's a practicing faithful Catholic.
But if we say no to the embassy, the bigger embassy here, and if we champion Jimmy Lai, and the consequences are that the Chinese say, well, don't bother Keir Starmer visit, and you can't have a new embassy yourselves in Beijing, are you saying we should just take that on the chin?
Yeah, well, we should behave normally, and we shouldn't allow China to redefine the rules of decency and redefine what our values are. I'm not sure that Starmer going to the Prime Minister going to Beijing is a bad thing, but I don't know what great good is going to come of it unless he makes a point of saying, if we're going to be friends, the first thing you've got to do is release Jimmy Lai. If that's the line he takes, and if that's what he presses, then worth doing. But you know what happens. I've been there and seen it. What happens is there's a big human rights case, which people press you to take up with the Chinese. And when you get there, you bang on about everything else. And at the end, you say, oh, by the way, as you know, we're rather concerned about that British citizen you've locked up. I hope you'll do something about it. And then we can tell the press we took it all very strongly. At least the other day, Yvette Cooper made a very, very good and clear statement. And it's very difficult to regard the Chinese as friends of ours when they behave like that. It's very difficult to regard them as friends when they put a bounty on the heads of people who are in exile from Hong Kong because of their belief in democracy and freedom. It's very hard to take the Chinese seriously as friends when they organize for letters to be sent to their neighbors of some of the dissidents, some of the Hong Kongers who are now living in here, telling their neighbors that they were actually sex workers back at home. In other words, to try to make it uncomfortable and difficult for Hong Kongers to live here. And they do a wonderful job here. They're virtually all of them professionals or working in opening their own businesses, and they make a huge contribution to the economy, as you would expect of people who were brought up in freedom, who were themselves exiles, fugitives from Chinese communism, who found refuge in a British colony. That sticks in the craw of Chinese communists, I can tell you.
Do you think we should be taking an equally frank attitude towards the Trump administration, which, after all, Donald Trump's now launched a legal suit against the BBC, which, if he were to be successful in his own terms, would wipe it out?
Yeah, I do, actually. I think that foreign policy, if you're a mature democracy like us, is not just about pursuing what you define as a national interest. It's not just about speaking up, if you're a democracy, for human rights. It's about a degree of self-respect. And I'm not sure that we behave with Trump like that. Trump is appalling. He's the worst president of the United States in my political lifetime. Does he believe in democracy? Dubious. Does he believe in the rule of law? Almost certainly not. He thinks the law is a way he can actually take revenge on people who've disagreed with him. I think he's a terrible man. And I certainly think giving him a state visit, as we did to try to flatter him, was awful. It was demeaning, but at least we didn't allow his carriage to go outside the walls of Windsor Castle, because people would have been booing him and shouting their views on him. He's a terrible man, and I feel sorry for all my American friends who have to endure him.
Do you think it's acceptable for the government to basically wash its hands of the BBC Panorama case with the United States with Donald Trump and say, well, it's a matter for them?
Well, I think it's important that the government should continue to behave as they have done, as the BBC being an independent broadcaster and probably the best a public service broadcaster in the world. I mean, I think we've got some other very good broadcasters. I think Sky is very good. I think Channel 4 is very good. But the BBC is incomparable. And when you compare trustworthiness between the BBC and other media organisations, the BBC comes well out at the top. I think if you compare it with the Daily Telegraph, for example, this will make me popular in the Daily Telegraph. The BBC's trustworthiness is twice the size of the Daily Telegraph's. So the BBC should be stood up for, and I think that the board and the chairman of the board have been entirely right to take the attitude they have to the execrable President Trump.
You see, the problem with what you've been saying about China and now about the United States is a lot of people just say, look, we're too weak. We're too dependent on our relations, our trade, our economic ties to these big blocs. And therefore we need to kowtow a bit. And, you know, some people would even say we did kowtow in the handing over of Hong Kong. I mean, what would you say to that?
Well, we didn't have kowtow over the handing over of Hong Kong. What we did was actually following a legal agreement that we'd reached, unfortunately, 99 years before, and we wouldn't have had any legal status in Hong Kong if we hadn't left certainly the new territories. So that's a nonsense argument. But you know, there's a wonderful Democratic politician called Adlai Stevenson, who alas was never president, and he said once that it's important in an open democracy to fight for your values, but also to live up to them. So what are we living up to? And what are our values if we're prepared on spurious grounds to think that we can only do business with other people if we polish their shoes? And it's simply not true. I can reel off till I'm blue in the face, and you're blue in the face too, I guess. Endless statistics which demonstrate how kowtowing doesn't actually increase your exports. It simply doesn't.